Hi, everyone, and welcome to this week's The Retro. My name is Tracy. You can follow me on Twitter at LadyLeet.
And I'm Rob Ocel. You can find me online at Rob Ocel.
Now you don't say Robocell.
I did say it wrong today. Thank you for noticing.
Robocell.
Yeah, it's my name spelt incorrectly, as we say often here. But Tracy, today we have a really awesome show. We are going to be talking about some of the most recent flame in our Subtweet section that has also been our sort of Rob and Tracy Reacts segment. We're going to be talking about whether Angular is costing companies billions and what that might mean.
But even more exciting outside of that, we get to talk to Misko, who actually created AngularJS and Angular, about a new framework that he has created, as well as his new job doing a CTO at a visual headless CMS shop called Builder.io. So I'm super excited about both the conversations today.
Yeah, so we have a lot of Angular and frameworks to discuss today. So without further ado, let's get started.
Hi, everyone, and welcome to this week's Watercooler. Today we have a very special guest, Misko, who is joining us. And Misko, you have a new job at Builder. Tell us a little bit about it and what you do.
Oh, thanks. Yes, so I joined Builder. Builder is a headless visual CMS, and I'm learning this. I'm always breaking this down. So CMS means content management system. It really, to be joking, it really allows engineers not having to talk to marketing people, right? So the marketing people can change their website, and engineers don't have to be involved, and so everybody's happy because they don't have to talk to each other. Because you know us engineers. The headless part of it means that it's actually running on your own infrastructure, meaning that you own the components, your engineers design the details, the shopping cart, the detail of the product, and so on. And the visual part is the kind of the unique part, which is that it allows the marketing people to do drag and drop. Most CMS systems, the marketing people basically just get a input box and they can change the text or the URL of an image or something of that sort. They cannot change the layout of the page. And so the unique thing about Builder is that you can actually change the layout. And so that gives a lot more freedom to the marketing folks. Obviously, we do secondary things like conversion tracking, A/B testing, and so on and so forth. So that's a little bit about Builder.
So I remember in like 2015, 2016 era, the joke was you could just throw a rock and hit a new framework. Every developer wanted to take their hand at building a framework. Nowadays, I feel like I talk to everybody and everybody has this idea for the CMS they want to build. As somebody who has been on both sides of this now, how do you find the right vision amongst a lot of other people trying their hand at similar things?
Yeah, so that's a good question. So all content management systems basically run on top of some sort of framework, whether it's Angular, React, Vue, Svelte. And it turns out that they all have this particular problem, which is that their time to interactive isn't great. It's relatively easy to build like a demo website that shows like, look, I can have an amazing time to interactive. Once you get to production, once you have the analytics installed, once the page and the site gets complicated and big, time to interactive becomes the biggest problem for these websites. And so the people spend a lot of time on it. So the thing that where Builder.io is unique is that Builder.io, or we have decided to actually build a framework specifically focusing on time to interactive. So time to interactive being the biggest problem, and it is the thing that nobody seems to be able to get right. And if you step back and you look at all the companies, whether it's Amazon, Gap, or any of the big e-commerce websites, they're all struggling with this. And because they're struggling with this, it's a sign that it's not really a problem of any one individual team. It's a systemic problem of the industry. And so our premise here is that the way we approach this problem is flawed, and then we can have a new approach that will focus on time to interactivity and have amazing time to interactive times. And if you step back on it, you kind of realize that the way the current frameworks are designed, they're kind of designed in this mental model of like, oh, we're building a desktop application. Here's all your code. It's available to you. Just go and run. Frameworks don't really take into account lazy loading. They all say that they can do lazy loading, but if you look at it, there isn't a lazy loading primitive built into it. And on top of that, they have a lot of things in the rendering pipeline that kind of makes an assumption that like all of the code that you need to rendering is available to you and you can just go. And all of these assumptions that are kind of subtle end up forcing you to download essentially the whole application at the very, very beginning. And the fact that you have to download the whole application at the very, very beginning and you have to rehydrate it really turns into kind of a bad time to interact at times.
That's so cool. You know, I'm assuming, so the framework that you were discussing creating, is that the Qwik framework that you've been discussing on Twitter as well, to put a name to it for people, or?
Yes, Qwik is the framework that we've been kind of focusing on. And Qwik has kind of a few differences. Like, so I kind of, if you step back and talk about frameworks for a second, I think the framework ecosystem is kind of full. Like, you could build a better, maybe Angular, React, Vue, Svelte, but it wouldn't be significantly better to kind of justify going to it. So if you're going to build another framework, you really have to look at it and say, like, this framework has to be a complete kick-ass at a particular thing that any other framework cannot do, right? And so the thing that where Qwik shines is time to interactive, right? We have a bootloader that is less than a kilobyte and bootstrap in less than a millisecond to kind of bring the application up and running. And this kind of startup times are essentially impossible in any other approach. We take SSR as a first-class. We focus on SSR. And all of this, the result of all this, is that we can then go to our CMS customers and say, like, hey, look, we all know that time to interactive matters. You know, Qwik websites, both Google will penalize you for, but also you'll have lower conversion rates. And so if you add all of these things together, you know, companies have a lot of incentives to bring time to interactivity for them. So if we can go to our customers and say, like, hey, you know, push this button, we can serve you on top of Qwik, and all of a sudden you'll be so much faster, I think it's going to create a lot of incentive for people to join, or to people to look into it.
You know, it's funny because it's a little bit like we were talking about with the CMS piece, but you know, I've been watching and reading so much about like Evan You and all the stuff that he's been doing with like Vite and really pushing the boundaries of things with Vue. Jason Miller has been posting the last couple of weeks. He's been trying to rewrite some of the DOM reconciler, I think, or the render for Preact, and he was like 600 frames per second, 700 frames per second. Do all of you just have like a secret Discord and you guys just send each other like, this is what I can do, can you do better type of stuff? Or, you know, how are you comparing notes? Is it really filling different voids? Like, how does this process sort of continue? How does innovation keep going in this sort of sphere?
I think everybody loves, you know, improving on whatever they have. I think the difference is that most frameworks focus on how to make sure that once the application is up and running, it's amazingly fast. And that's an important metric. However, if you step back, really, the issue isn't that any particular website is slow once it's up and running, right? No matter which framework you choose, the sites are plenty of fast. That's not the issue. The issue is the startup time. And all of these performance improvements that people do to kind of make sure the rendering is getting faster and faster and faster, that's nice, but it doesn't actually help with performance times. The other problem is that a lot of people focus on, you know, what's the fastest framework? And it's all very loaded, right? Because it depends how you measure and so on and so forth. But most of the measurements that are done, again, are done when the VM is already started up, when the code is available, when everything is, when the jitter is already warmed up and everything has been transpiled into native code. And this is what most people are focusing on. And while this is an important area to focus, my point is that this is not something that necessarily helps you with time to interactive. And so I think there's a new era where people are going to start to realize that, hey, the existing frameworks are plenty of fast. And it's nice that we are making them faster and faster every day, but that's not really the thing that I care about, right? I care about the time to interactive, because this is the thing that really will differentiate whether you go, whether a customer will see your URL, will click on it, and will go all the way to the purchase, or whether they'll get distracted because the page just takes too long to load.
Well, I'm super excited because anything that can make Alex Russell turn his head and look excitedly towards a new framework being developed, I think that's something that everybody needs to keep an eye on. So,
are there some tweets? Do I need to like look at Alex's Twitter and see what he said?
It was positive. Even being sarcastic.
No, he was very positive. I think Alex has been tweeting about this for a while, right? Which is that everybody's just focusing on making the steady state fast, and everybody's kind of ignoring the startup time. And it is the startup time that really is the problematic bit. And the thing that the Qwik focuses on is how do we delay as much of this stuff as possible? The page has already been rendered on a server side. Well, let's just continue where the server left off rather than replay everything that the server just did so that we can get to the same state that the server used to be and continue from that. And so the big difference is that I say the current set of frameworks are replayable, meaning that they have to redo everything the server just did to continue. The big difference with Qwik is that it's resumable, right? It continues on where the server left off. So if the server already has rendered a particular component, there's no need to download the template for it or the listeners for it or the code that creates it or the code that fetches the data for it. None of this stuff is needed unless you're actually modifying that particular component. And especially on e-commerce websites, most of the page is actually static, right? There's a couple of few things that actually have to be changed, like the shopping cart or changing the count of how many things you're actually purchasing or the size of the shoes you're buying or something like that. But for the most part, most of the page is actually static. And this is where Qwik really shines, is because it can say like, oh, this stuff doesn't change, I'm not going to touch it. Whereas all the other frameworks are like, well, it doesn't matter that it doesn't change. I still need to register the listeners, and I need to figure out what the listeners are. So I have to download the template and execute it and so on and so forth. And the end result is that all of this code has to get downloaded, executed, and run. And the end result is that you're slow.
Well, that's super amazing. So I'm trying to find the Twitter. Hold on, I can just go to your Twitter. So if you want to follow Misko, you can follow him on Twitter at Hevery. Actually, I'm going to go ahead and share my screen so everybody can see all that. Okay, there we go. So yeah, definitely everyone should be checking out Builder.io, and then also Qwik, of course. And, we didn't mention it because, obviously everyone should know, Misko also created Angular and AngularJS. And Karma didn't know that, but you can follow Qwik over here as well. And if you guys are familiar with Ionic, Adam Bradley is also involved in Builder and Qwik. So can people start using this, Misko? Are we good? Good to go?
It's very much in a bleeding edge kind of a state. Our primary goal is to get it integrated with Builder.io so that our CMS customers can start using it.
Yeah.
If in the process others can use it as well, that's great. But it is not the goal of Qwik isn't to be an open source framework for everybody, right? The goal of Qwik is to be serving our customers in a way that is open source and others can use as well. The secondary goal of Qwik is actually to start having these conversations for people to kind of say like, hey, there's more to a framework than just how quickly a page can render, right? What it really matters is how quickly does it actually come up? How much code do I have to ship to the browser to get anything going? And these kinds of conversations, I think, have been absent. And I'm kind of hoping that through all of the blog posts and all the Twitter comments that I'm, causing to stir up, I'm hoping that people will say like, hey, we've been kind of ignoring this particular part, and this is an important part that we should focus on as well.
That's fun. So two statements you made, which is so funny because it's like the statement you made of like, hey, we're building something that is open source that people can use too, but we're really building it for, our customers. I'm like, oh, that sounds very Facebook. And then what you said about stirring up conversations and really helping push the industry forward into new conversations about this really reminds me of Brendan Eich, who that's kind of why he started Brave, right? To talk about those conversations about what Brave is doing and to, again, just be a player within the industry to help push it forward. So that's really cool. We obviously love having you on and love what you're doing. So again, everyone, check out Misko's stuff on Twitter, and we're super happy to have you. And thanks for joining us.
Thanks for having me.
And now it's time for the Subtweet, the part of the show where we talk about the things that, well, we've been talking about online and give you the information that you need in order to have better, more enlightened conversations about this topic in the future. And today, Tracy, this will be a challenge of our skills to see if we can sanitize a conversation that I think, quite frankly, is unsalvageable. However, waves were made in the last week when an article hit entitled Angular is costing companies billions.
Who is this guy, by the way? Yeah.
You know, I think first and foremost, it has to be said, as the people at Wikipedia would say, citation needed. First off, you know, if you're going to write an article, I think it's really important. Let's hit this at a meta level. If you're going to write an article that's critical of a framework, think about why it is that you believe the things that you believe, and if they're externally verifiable. So you could believe that Angular is a steaming pile of garbage. You could believe that you don't like working in it and you think other people you know don't like working in it, but none of those things are objective in any reasonable way. Where would be the evidence? How could you find evidence that a framework was actually costing companies billions? That would be an interesting hypothesis, and it would be interesting to do research to that effect, but one cannot start from a position of, I dislike a framework, and end with, it's costing a lot of people money, because it's not really bringing people along to, you know, on the journey. So, yeah. A lot of the conversation centers on this idea of Angular being a piece of fad tech, of which I think Sass is also added to that list. And the alternative presented is just to do things in either vanilla JavaScript or jQuery, which have served us well through time immemorial. So I think that there's two interesting questions going on here, two interesting lines of conversation going on here. If we're going to engage with this piece honestly and believe that it could spark a good dialogue online. First and foremost, are there examples of where frameworks such as React or Vue, doesn't have to just be Angular, where any framework has helped a team, especially teams at significant scale? So not teams of individuals or teams of 2, 3, 4, or 5, but teams of dozens, of hundreds, of thousands of developers who might be co-maintaining a singular site where they're maintaining that primarily using vanilla JavaScript and or jQuery. Now, there have certainly been examples of this throughout time, but the question is it easier, harder? Does it pose more or fewer problems? Is it easier or harder to onboard more junior developers? These are interesting conversations that it might be worth talking to different people and getting their perspectives, you know, collecting case studies, collecting information. If you're in a master's program or a PhD program, this is interesting stuff to examine, whether frameworks have contributed to software projects that have fewer defects, or that things that are more maintainable, or whether it's allowed more people to enter tech and do these things, or whether it's hurt in some way. I think it's a worthwhile topic. I just don't know that this was the correct opening piece of scholarship on this topic. It's great, but for anybody out there that is going to write an article like this where they're trying to persuade people to not use a particular technology and use a different technology instead, here's what I would suggest. Think about some of the reasons why someone is using that technology. Why do people say they like using Angular? Then, in your technology of choice, show how it accounts for the things that people say they want. Don't worry about saying it accounts for them better than the other technology. Don't say, don't try to say that yours does and the other one doesn't, or, try to hash all that out. I think people waste a lot of time when they try to set up bad benchmarks or bad comparisons. Inspire people with your vision. Show them how it works for you and for your teams. Show them a model of what their lives could be like. And if it truly is persuasive, you will start to win those hearts and minds. And you'll do it without causing wailing and gnashing of teeth, without burning bridges, without just getting the eye rolls of everybody else. But I'm actually interested to hear how this engineer sets up jQuery projects, and how they code share, and how they onboard junior developers, and how they do that how they tackle any number of problems that Angular helps people tackle. I would love to hear how they solve those problems, because I think it would be so inspiring to have yet another option in my tool belt of another way to architect a site. But instead, we're having the conversation about some of the sillier, more over-the-top arguments. And I don't think that the message that the author was going for is coming through, because how it's obscured through the attacks. And I think that's the lesson for anybody here on a meta level. It gets engagement and it gets clicks to attack something.
But it's also not, it's like he's not attacking just Angular. He's also attacking all frameworks.
Correct. Right.
Yeah.
Angular is sort of the punching bag on the title, but he does make reference to Vue and all the others as well. And I think, if you want to get the clicks, you want to get the rage, this works. If you want to win hearts and minds, if you want to be a real thought leader, this isn't it. I think in general, you have to show, there are so many different ways to do things. What you need to show people is the ways that your approach is optimal. In other words, why it works really well for your use case. Show us your use cases, show us your solution, inspire people. But if you're trying to say my solution is better than the other solution, all you're doing is inviting people to show you why your interpretation of that tech is fallacious or wrong. I see it all the time. This framework is faster than this framework. And then people dig into the code and they're like, well, that's not how you would write that. That's not how you would do that. And if you have bunk data in your benchmarks, the benchmarks are useless. All you did was create a war amongst people that already were having a war. And so, I will say in defense of the author that the reason I'm so positive, because somewhere in the article it said, and God help you if you're a contractor who works with several enterprises who are all using different UI frameworks, and I will take any blessing that anyone is willing to send our way. So...
Yes. And I mean, everyone has opinions, so I respect his opinion, but we probably wouldn't get along from trying to build a more inclusive ecosystem in JavaScript.
Well, let us know.
Yeah, let us know what you
down
think.
Below. How many billions of dollars has Angular cost your company?
Yes.
And what do you think the worst technology is? No, please don't do that.
Okay, thanks everyone for joining us for this week's The Retro. We hope you all had fun. Definitely got into a lot of really fun conversations there.
If Angular has cost your company billions, just make sure you send the receipt to Misko. He's promised to cover all of the lost funds. No, but as always, we say the conversation doesn't stop here. So if there's anything that you particularly enjoyed or had a reaction to, please leave it down in the comments below. Of course, if there are any cool or interesting technologies you've been playing with, or any people you think that we should be speaking to, let us know down in the comments below, or find us on Twitter and let us know, because we love to give you guys the content that you most like to see. And Tracy, as we conclude, did you hear about the guy who was addicted to brake fluid?
No.
It's a tragic story, but the good news is he could stop anytime he wanted to.
That was good.